At dawn on the 16th of July 1945, a gigantic fireball, brighter than many suns, burst over the New Mexico desert, exploding with the force of 20,000 tons of TNT and fusing the sand to glass. After the searing flash, a giant mushroom cloud boiled 40,000 feet into the sky. It was the symbol of a new era, the atomic age. As the ground trembled with the force of the explosion, the brilliant physicist Robert Oppenheimer, the man who had led the team which built the atomic bomb, was reminded of a grim line from a sacred Hindu text, the Song of God. "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The race to build the atomic bomb had been won. It had begun in 1934, when the physicist Leo Szilard, a Hungarian-born refugee from Nazi Germany, realized that enormous amounts of energy could be released by splitting certain atoms and setting up a chain reaction. 8 years later, in a squash court under an abandoned Chicago football stadium, the Italian Enrico Fermi, another refugee from fascism, built an atomic pile from graphite bricks and uranium. When Fermi withdrew the pile's control rods, he achieved a chain reaction. Could this be used to create a bomb of enormous power? In Britain, two more refugees from the Nazis, Rudolf Peierls and Otto Frisch, had discovered that a rare form of the element uranium, uranium-235, could produce an instantaneous explosive chain reaction of the type needed for a bomb. Fermi's pile produced plutonium, and this too could be used to make an atomic bomb. In the late 1930s, atomic research had been well advanced in Nazi Germany. Many scientists feared that an atomic bomb might be placed in the hands of the German leader, Adolf Hitler. The consequences seemed almost too terrible to contemplate, as Hitler's policies inexorably pushed Europe to the brink of war. From Europe to the Pacific, another global conflict loomed. In 1937, Japan had invaded China. 3 years of civil war had devastated Spain. By August 1939, Hitler was preparing for an invasion of Poland. The people of Britain and France were steeling themselves for war with Germany. It came on the 1st of September 1939, when German tanks rolled across the Polish frontier. Ahead of them ranged the German Air Force. Poland was overwhelmed within 6 weeks. Hitler's blitzkrieg had begun. Ominously, it seemed that Hitler also had other weapons up his sleeve. On the 19th of September, as Polish resistance collapsed, he made a speech in which, for the first time, he referred to a mystery weapon, which would place Germany in an unassailable position. Hitler's announcement sent a shiver down the spine of another refugee from Nazi Germany. In the United States, Albert Einstein, the leading physicist of the day, warned President Roosevelt that Germany might be planning to build an atomic bomb. Einstein wrote a letter to the president in which he warned that recent research leads me to expect that the element uranium can be turned into a new source of energy. This could lead to the construction of bombs. A single bomb could destroy a whole port and some of the surrounding territory. The United States was not yet at war, but the president responded by setting up a uranium committee. In July 1941, the committee reported to Roosevelt that in a future war, the use of an atomic weapon would be determining. Simultaneously, the British were working on a nuclear weapons program, codenamed Tube Alloys. The pace quickened when the United States entered the war in December 1941, after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. British scientists joined forces with the Americans. Research was transferred to America under the codename Manhattan Project, because much of the initial work took place at Columbia University in Manhattan. In overall command was U.S. Army engineer General Leslie R. Groves. The scientific director was Robert Oppenheimer of the University of California. The two men were complete opposites. Groves was a hard-driving ramrod. Oppenheimer was intense, anguished, and humanist. Together, they made a great team. It was at Oppenheimer's suggestion that the New Mexico desert became the site where the bomb was to be tested. Oppenheimer needed a climate suitable for year-round outdoor work and a location remote from sea coasts to reduce the risk of attack. For security reasons, the area should be thinly populated, but also accessible by road and rail. It also needed to be sufficiently attractive to keep his scientific prima donnas happy as they went about their work. The complex built at Los Alamos met all these criteria. The Allies' most brilliant scientific brains made their way to Los Alamos. One of the scientists' wives recalled, "I felt akin to the pioneering women accompanying their husbands into the unknown." At Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a vast factory complex covering over 100 square miles produced uranium-235. Plutonium was made in primitive nuclear reactors at Hanford, Washington State. By 1945, there were about 125,000 people working on the Manhattan Project at a cost of $2 billion. The project was shrouded in secrecy and maximum security. It contrasted with the makeshift technology which was at first used to handle the radioactive material brought to Los Alamos. Government contracts for the manufacture of the bomb were heavily disguised as research into solar power and alternative fuels. When the top scientists left Los Alamos, they traveled under aliases. In spite of its size and the number of people involved, no word of the project was leaked to Germany or Japan. Only the Soviet Union knew what was going on, informed by a spy within Los Alamos, the refugee physicist Klaus Fuchs. In the summer of 1945, a plutonium bomb was ready for testing. On the 11th of July, the two hemispheres of plutonium were taken to the test site, codenamed Trinity, in a sedan. The crew seemed eager to get rid of their strange cargo, even if they didn't know what it was. The device was assembled beneath a tower covered by a tent. It contained a hollow sphere surrounded by high explosive charges, which, when detonated, crushed the plutonium into a critical mass. No one, not even Oppenheimer, was sure that the bomb would work at all. On the 14th of July, the tent was removed, and the device, completely assembled except for the detonators, was raised to the top of the 100-foot tower. While the device was being armed, tests continued on a dummy unit swathed in cables. At 5:30 in the morning on the 16th of July, the switch was thrown in a control bunker 5 miles from the tower. Among those who witnessed the spectacle, feelings of exhilaration at a task accomplished were soon replaced by a sense of foreboding at the powers which had been unleashed. One of Oppenheimer's colleagues told him, "We're all sons of bitches now." 3 months earlier, in conditions of the utmost secrecy, an airfield had been built by American engineers on the Pacific island of Tinian. It was from Tinian that the atom raids on Japan were to be launched. On the 26th of July, the American heavy cruiser Indianapolis arrived at Tinian carrying the vital cup-shaped chunk of uranium-235 encased in a lead cylinder. Having delivered the fissile element of the bomb, Indianapolis set sail for the Philippines. The cruiser was unescorted, and thus easy meat for the ace Japanese submarine commander Mochitsura Hashimoto, who intercepted her. Some 800 men survived the torpedoing, but the secrecy of the Indianapolis's mission meant that she went down without sending an SOS signal. 3 days passed before the US Navy realized that she was overdue. Drownings and shoals of sharks meant that only 484 men were taken from the water. Preparations went ahead on Tinian. The bomb to be dropped was torpedo-shaped and nicknamed Little Boy. The recommendation to use it against Japan had been issued in Washington by a committee of scientific, military, and political advisors. They urged that it be dropped as soon as possible and without warning on a military or industrial target. The men chosen to drop Little Boy were the crew of a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay, after the mother of its pilot, Captain Paul W. Tibbets. Enola Gay took off from Tinian early on the 6th of August on a 13-hour round trip to Japan. Her target was Hiroshima, a city beside Japan's inland sea. Enola Gay climbed to 31,000 feet on her bombing run. Bombardier Thomas W. Ferriby released Little Boy at 8:15 a.m. Japanese time. Less than a minute later, Little Boy exploded 2,000 feet over the city. The center of Hiroshima was flattened, and 80,000 people killed. Now it was the turn of the plutonium bomb, Fat Man, on which an encouraging message was inscribed to the Emperor Hirohito, promising him a second kiss. Fat Man was potentially even more destructive than Little Boy. The plutonium bomb was dropped on the port of Nagasaki on the 9th of August. In spite of its enormous power, the equivalent of 20,000 tons of TNT, the bomb caused less damage than Little Boy, because the hills around and in the city contained the blast. But it was bad enough. 35,000 died at Nagasaki. Later, many thousands more died of burns and radiation sickness. The secret of Los Alamos, so closely guarded for so long, was now out. On the 2nd of September 1945, aboard the battleship Missouri, anchored in Tokyo Bay, the Japanese formally surrendered to the Allies. The American General MacArthur declared, "These proceedings are now closed." The war in Europe had already ended before the plutonium bomb was tested in New Mexico. Hitler had committed suicide in his Berlin bunker, Allied soldiers combed the ruins for his remains. The German survivors of the Battle of Berlin were marched through the shattered capital of the Third Reich. The red flag flew over the Reichstag. Allied scientific and intelligence teams searched Germany for evidence of Hitler's atomic weapons program. They discovered that only one reactor had been built, but it had not produced any material for a bomb. The most well-known German physicist and unofficial spokesman for the German nuclear effort was Karl Heisenberg. It has been suggested that Heisenberg subtly sabotaged the program to prevent Hitler getting the bomb. The Allies also played their part. The Norsk hydro plant in Norway made heavy water, a vital element in the atomic pile the Germans were building. The plant had been crippled by an Allied commando raid. The strategic bombing campaign against the Reich had also delayed the German atomic program. Hitler himself had lent the Allies a hand. From the moment the Nazis came to power in 1933, they sought to isolate Jews from German society. This led to outright persecution. Many leading scientists were driven into exile. Research and development were also held back by the chaos of the competing personal empires within the Nazi state. There had been 12 separate teams competing with each other to present Hitler with an atomic bomb. Small wonder that they failed. Hitler may have been denied the bomb, but he did have a weapon in his arsenal capable of inflicting nuclear devastation on Britain, the V-2 rocket. In 1943, Hitler and the Nazi propaganda machine issued a torrent of warnings that vengeance was about to burst over the heads of the Allies. In 1936, a rocket research establishment had been set up at Peenemünde, on a remote island in the Baltic. It was run by General Walter Dornberger and a young scientist, Werner von Braun, the German equivalent of the Groves Oppenheimer team at Los Alamos. By the summer of 1943, work at Peenemünde was well advanced on the V-2 rocket and the V-1 flying bomb. The program had had its ups and its downs. At the end of August 1943, RAF Bomber Command raided Peenemünde. It was the only time that the full weight of Bomber Command was thrown against a single, small target. The bombers held up the V-2 program for 2 months and forced von Braun to move the manufacturing facility to an underground complex at Nordhausen in the Harz Mountains. It was not until September 1944 that the first V-2s were launched against Britain. The 12-ton rocket, running on alcohol and liquid oxygen, was not a particularly accurate weapon. But London was a very big target. Over 500 fell in the London area, the last as late as March 1945, killing nearly 3,000 people. The V-2 was a terrifying weapon, but it was expensive to manufacture and carried only a 1-ton warhead, no bigger than that of the V-1. Each V-2 cost 20 times more to build than the V-1. such a small payload could not justify the cost of developing and building the V2. The 5,000 tons of high explosive which could be delivered by 5,000 V2s seems puny compared with the 2 million tons of bombs dropped on Germany by Allied bombers. But was the V2 intended as the delivery vehicle for something far more devastating than high explosive? The answer to this riddle may lie in a number of massive sites in northern France, crumbling reinforced concrete hulks whose purpose remains cloaked in mystery. The V2 was transported on a vehicle which doubled as its launcher. It could be fired from almost any level piece of ground, making it very difficult to spot from the air. Northern France is dotted with simple V2 sites, nothing more than a concrete hardstanding near which the control vehicle was parked. But in the Pas-de-Calais region, there are several massive V2 sites which were linked with sophisticated radar tracking stations. Some of them contained the first missile silos ever built. These complex sites were built in 1942 and 1943, possibly to house and arm a very special type of V2, modified to carry a radiation weapon in its warhead, highly radioactive material derived from the German atom program, which was mixed with fine sand. A rain of V2s armed with this deadly cargo would airburst over southern England, turning its towns and farmland into an irradiated desert. Work was also going ahead on a long-range V2, capable of reaching the eastern seaboard of the United States. Such a technical achievement would have been undermined by arming long-range rockets merely with conventional one-ton warheads. The memoirs of Werner von Braun are strangely silent about the complex sites in the Pas-de-Calais. At the end of the war, von Braun was scooped up by the US intelligence and later played a vital role in the American space program. Perhaps he decided not to compromise his good fortune by telling the world that he had planned to make Boston or New York uninhabitable. Time ran out for the Third Reich before Hitler's nuclear-armed rockets could be fired from their special sites in northern France. By September 1944, they had been overrun by the Allies. But there was one last twist to the story of Germany's atomic program. On the 25th of March 1945, 3 weeks before the Red Army opened its offensive on Berlin, a large German mine-laying submarine set sail for Japan. She had an interesting cargo: a dismantled Me-262 jet fighter and several Japanese officers. Stored in her mine shafts were a number of heavy lead boxes containing radioactive material for the Japanese, who had their own nuclear weapons program. One of the submarine's crew has claimed that the containers carried the label U-235. Uranium-235 is needed to trigger an explosive chain reaction. The war in Europe ended when the U-boat was only halfway across the Atlantic. Her captain surrendered to an Allied destroyer. The Japanese committed suicide rather than compromise their mission. According to the US authorities, 56 kilograms of uranium oxide were unloaded from the U-boat. But uranium oxide emits no radiation. It could be carried in a cardboard box. The Americans knew that the Japanese Navy had 3 specialized submarines, the largest in the world, each capable of carrying 2 catapult-launched aircraft with a bomb load of about 2,000 pounds. Standing off the coast of California, they could have launched their warplanes on a kamikaze mission to drop a radiation bomb on Los Angeles or San Francisco. The capture of the mine-laying U-boat seems to have put paid to this mission. At the start of the Manhattan Project, General Groves had told the scientists working on the bomb, "Make it quicker without being caught, and we'll have them. Don't, and they will have us." Thanks to his remarkable partnership with Oppenheimer, the Allies did get there first. The Germans never got near making a bomb, but it was clear that other nuclear options lay within their grasp, made possible by a special type of V2 fired from the complex sites in northern France. The Germans were supplying atom secrets to Japan. How many lead-lined containers had been delivered to the Japanese before May 1945? The Americans did not know. Perhaps the discovery of the U-boat's cargo accelerated the decision to drop the bomb on Hiroshima.